Hey everyone, it's your real estate buddy here, and today's story is wild. Texas rent prices are exploding. People are losing their minds, and apparently the governor is too. I've been watching this closely, gathering data, talking to folks in Texas, and I'm going to walk you through what's happening, how we got here, where this could go, and what it means if you're watching from somewhere else. I want this to feel like we're just chatting. I'll bring the facts, but in a chill way. All right, let's roll. So picture this, in cities all over Texas, Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, rent has been climbing at rates nobody expected. Tenants are getting squeezed, affordability is slipping fast, and the pressure is reaching a breaking point. The governor, Greg Abbott, has publicly shown frustration, giving interviews, making statements, even slamming what he calls market failures and institutional policies that he feels are making things worse. He's under fire from both sides. Housing advocates saying he's not doing enough, and critics saying he should back off. To understand why this eruption happened, we've got to go back a bit. Texas, historically, has had a reputation for cheaper housing relative to many states. That was part of the draw. Lower costs, more land, more growth. But over the last decade, population boomed. People moving in, job growth, urbanization, and the supply of housing couldn't keep pace. The state is short hundreds of thousands of homes. Lawmakers estimated a gap of roughly 320,000 homes that ought to exist but don't. That means people compete for fewer units, pushing prices up. The problem is worse when incomes don't keep pace, and in Texas, many people are seeing stagnant or slowly rising wages. So rent becomes a huge burden. At the same time, there are local zoning laws, minimum lot sizes, restrictions on accessory dwelling units or secondary homes, resistance to denser multi-unit developments in neighborhoods. These local rules are choking the potential for more units to be built where demand is highest. Some bills have been proposed to override or ease those local rules, but they face a lot of pushback. In that context, the rent crisis escalates, and that's when Governor Abbott starts reacting more sharply. One action he's backing is a pretty heavy use of housing tax credits. In mid-2025, he announced that over $99 million in housing tax credits would be distributed to help finance development or rehabilitation of 63 rental properties, aiming to produce over 4,400 units with rents affordable to households earning up to 80% of median income. That's a move to ease pressure, but critics argue it's still not enough, and implementation is slow. Meanwhile, the governor is critical of what he calls overreaching local government rules, arguing that local zoning and building barriers are part of the problem. He's pushing the narrative that state intervention is needed to loosen those constraints so more housing can be built faster and more affordably. That brings us to his loses it moments. He's been impassioned, visibly irate in interviews, using strong language to call out what he sees as obstinate municipalities and policies that stand in the way of solutions. Some commentators say he's trying to shift blame, to say, look, I'm doing what I can, but others are blocking progress. Others see it as political theater, showing he's responsive to public anger. The tension is real, and it's making headlines. Let's get into some numbers, because they tell the deeper story. Home values in Texas have surged. Since 2019, many areas saw market values grow by over 40%. That creates two big effects. It puts pressure on nearby rents, and it pushes property taxes upward, which landlords often pass on. Also, Texas builds more homes per year than many states, yet affordability still worsens. That tells us that volume alone doesn't fix imbalance when demand is off the charts and land, material, labor, and regulatory costs are rising too. There is a paradox. building more is good, but at some point, you also need reform in regulation and incentives so those buildings actually meet the needs of average folks, not just luxury units. Lawmakers this year have flagged zoning reforms, raising objections thresholds, relaxing lot size mandates, enabling ADUs, accessory dwelling units, backyard flats, in more places. These seem helpful, but they face political resistance because neighborhoods resist change. So, when the governor lashes out, part of it is frustration that the structures aren't shifting fast enough. Now, I want to talk about who's hurting the most. Renters with lower to middle income are seeing rent consume a big chunk of their wages. In some cities, more than 30 to 40% of income is going to rent, utilities, and transit. That leaves almost nothing for savings, food, education, or emergencies. Younger professionals, families who move for work, gig economy workers, many are now forced further out from city centers, increasing commuting times, costs, and reducing choice. In many places, turnover is high. People move frequently just to chase more affordable rent. Landlords, on the other hand, face rising property taxes, increased costs for maintenance, labor, materials, insurance, and regulatory burdens. Some large institutional investors have been snapping up single-family houses to rent out, which intensifies competition. Some in the political arena say those investors are squeezing out regular buyers and renters. The governor and others have floated curbs on these institutional purchases or setting limits, though the effectiveness is debated. Coming back to Abbott's showdowns, when rent spikes, news stories spread. People call their reps. Media amplifies pressure. The governor has been vocal in media interviews that state resources are being mobilized, that tax credits are being used, and that local governments need to get out of the way. Some local officials push back, saying the state is overreaching or doesn't understand the local context. It's a messy tug of war. Let's imagine what's next. In the short term, we may see more aggressive state legislation to override local zoning restrictions, more funding for affordable housing, faster permitting rules, incentives for developers to build non-luxury units, and maybe limits on institutional investors. But it won't be easy. Politics, NIMBYism, existing neighborhood resistance, and budget priorities all complicate it. There is also risk. If the state forces too much, too fast, there may be backlash or legal challenges from cities. In the long term, if reforms work, we may see more housing supply in high-demand areas, rent growth slows, more affordability, and perhaps stabilization of the real estate market. If not, the crisis deepens. More displacement, more homelessness, more inequality, and political consequences. So what can someone watching from outside Texas learn? First, rent pressure is a structural issue. You need supply, regulations that allow density, incentives, and balance between public and private roles. Second, when a powerful leader loses it in public, sometimes it's theatrics, sometimes stress, sometimes a signal of prioritizing that issue. But what really matters is what happens behind the scenes. Bills passed, local government cooperation, money flowing, barriers removed. Third, in real estate, the tension between local voice and broader state or national policy is real. Local residents often resist change in their block, but without reform, affordable housing just can't scale. If you're investing, watching, or advocating, this is one of those pivot moments. Before wrapping up, I want to call out a few examples I saw. In Austin, rents in popular neighborhoods jumped double digits in a year. Some tenants reported lease renewals with 10 to 20% increases. That's huge strain. Also, in major Texas cities, waiting lists for rent-assisted or subsidized housing are growing longer, and developers tell me that they often shelve projects because of permit delays, high land costs, costs and community pushback even when financial incentives exist. That gap between money promised and units delivered is where the friction lives. I'm watching several bills in the Texas legislature that, if passed, could allow cities to override restrictive lot mandates, allow more multi-unit density, speed up permitting, and increase investment in infrastructure. If those come through, we may see relief, but timing matters. Since the crisis is already underway, let me be clear, nothing is guaranteed. Real estate pulses with policy, money, public will, and timing. The governor's emotional reactions make headlines, but they are just one part of a much bigger ecosystem of actors, laws, markets, and people crushed by rising costs. If you're a renter, it's a scary time. If you're a landlord or investor, you're navigating rising expenses and political risk. If you're a policymaker or advocate, this is a moment to push bold, smart reforms before housing becomes even more out of reach. Finally, for you watching this channel, keep your eyes on where the reforms land, which cities lead, how state-local tensions play out, and whether the promised units actually get built. I'll keep tracking every twist, interviewing folks on the ground, showing you where the deals are, and how this drama reshapes real estate. This Texas rent explosion and the governor's meltdown aren't just Texas news. They're a case study for anywhere housing is straining. So let's keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for systems that let people live affordably while building responsibly. Thanks for tagging along.